Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Center for American Progress, the National Employment Law Project, and Community Legal Services, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this morning's event commemorating Second Chance Month. My name is Rebecca Vallis, and I'm a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and co-founder of the Clean Slate Initiative. It's my honor to moderate a powerhouse lineup today of state leaders working to ensure that a criminal record is no longer a life sentence to poverty, a topic that is more important now than ever. Following America's failed experiment with mass incarceration and overcriminalization, some 70 million to 100 million Americans now have some type of criminal record. While felony records carry the greatest stigma, in the digital era, any record, no matter how old or minor, can stand in the way of reentry, economic stability, and full participation in society. The proliferation of criminal background checks, together with the sharp rise in the share of the population now saddled by the stigma of a record, it's reached now 1 in 3 US adults, have become major drivers of poverty and racial inequality in the US. 9 in 10 employers, 4 in 5 landlords, and 3 in 5 colleges and universities now utilize background checks to screen out applicants with records, putting economic stability, let alone upward mobility, out of reach for tens of millions of individuals and families who have been impacted by the US criminal legal system. Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities who have been disproportionately impacted by our broken criminal legal system have also been particularly harmed by the perpetual punishment that comes with a record. Mass incarceration and its often lifelong collateral consequences have thus come to serve as key underpinnings of the fabric of structural racism that defines much of 21st century American society today. To free people from the paper prison of a criminal record, red, blue, and purple states alike have been making important strides to remove barriers to opportunity for people with records. 2 of the most impactful trends in recent years have been the expansion of record clearing remedies, such as sealing and expungement, with a growing number of states now making criminal record clearing automatic to ensure that people are able to get their records cleared, whether or not they're able to afford to hire a lawyer and navigate a complex court process. That's a policy that's now come to be known as Clean Slate. And fair chance licensing, which reforms state occupational licensing laws that impose unfair and unnecessary barriers to employment for people with records, restricting access to jobs in fast-growing industries such as healthcare, education, and transportation. Today, nearly 1/4 of US workers need a government license or certificate to work in their chosen fields. In 2016, with support from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, CAP, Community Legal Services, and the National Employment Law Project, we're thrilled to team up to launch a 3-year initiative focused on supporting state leaders in advancing Clean Slate and fair chance licensing policies in their states. In the years since, bipartisan momentum for both Clean Slate and fair chance licensing reforms has exploded, with dozens of states advancing these policy reforms to remove barriers to economic security for their justice-impacted residents. Meanwhile, bipartisan momentum has also been trickling up to the federal level, with the bipartisan Federal Clean Slate Act introduced just this week in the U.S. House and Senate by Senators Bob Casey and Joni Ernst and Representatives Lisa Blunt-Rochester and Guy Reschenthaler. It would create the first ever federal record clearing remedy and establish automatic record clearing at the federal level. And President Biden pledged to adopt these and other second chance policies during the 2020 campaign. As leaders at all levels of government work to build back better and to address the nation's legacy of racial injustice and persistent racial inequality, removing barriers to employment for workers with records is more urgently needed now than ever amid the recovery from the pandemic and economic downturn to ensure not only a full, but an equitable recovery that does not leave tens of millions of system-impacted individuals and families behind. We've got a great lineup of state leaders on deck for you this morning to share their experiences advancing transformative clean slate and fair chance licensing reforms in their states. You can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #SecondChanceMonth. And to kick us off this morning, it is my great honor to introduce our first speaker, the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, Garland Gilchrist II, an engineer by training who received his first computer at the age of 5. It is only fitting that Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist spearheaded the Whitmer administration's work to design and implement what is now the most expansive clean slate automatic expungement law anywhere in the US, enacted in October of last year. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for being with us today to mark Second Chance Month.
Rebecca, thank you so much, and to all of our friends at CAP, all of the allies, the organizations, the justice system impacted people who have been doing the work for so long to open wide this door of access to opportunity, access to full participation in civic life, which at the beginning and end of the day is the thing that so many people, that's all we've asked for, to be able to be your fullest and best self, and to not have barriers erected that stand between you and that possibility simply because of the past or because of a mistake that you have already paid a debt to society for. That debt should not have to come due again and again and again. And so I am thankful that here in the state of Michigan, under the leadership of Governor Gretchen Whitmer, in partnership with so many allies on both sides of the aisle in the Michigan legislature and community advocates across the political spectrum, have really stepped up and stood tall and said that we want to have a pathway to participation and prosperity for people in the state of Michigan by passing our clean slate automated expungement law in October, alongside expanding expungement eligibility for other offenses, including possession of cannabis, aligning with our state's ballot initiative that made adult use cannabis legal in the state of Michigan in 2018. This is a march toward justice. This is bending the arc of history and of opportunity toward more justice, more equity, and more inclusion. This is really what we need to be optimizing policy for. Policy tools exist to create pathways for people to be their best selves. And they don't, so the idea of automated clean slate expungement is important to me because, frankly, we're just granting people the path that's already theirs. You shouldn't have to pay somebody or have to know how to navigate these complexities that should have never been there in the first place. And so we thought that, in Michigan and other states that have really stepped up and done this, these need to be available to you just because you are you. And so that principle is what we are building policy around. And we're proud of that here in the state of Michigan, and proud to not only show this leadership, but also to lend our experiences to other states. We have also put our money where our mouth is as an administration. In our fiscal year budget for this coming year, we have put forward, proposed $22 million to develop this automated record expungement system, again, so it can be as seamless and as connected as it needs to be to all of the systems that are in this very complex interlaced criminal legal data system issue, which is a whole nother conversation that I would love to talk to you about as an engineer. But we can solve that problem too. So we have both the investment to be able to make these systems real in the first place, and then we have proposed ongoing investments for maintenance and personnel support and supporting our court systems and everyone to support it. Last but not least, I'll share that I really see this as jobs legislation. This is about people's eligibility to be able to not only work, but to be entrepreneurs who can have access to capital, to be families that can have access to housing. This creates the conditions for more people. Some estimates upwards of 800,000 to 1 million people in Michigan from being more having the soil be more fertile for them to plant the seeds of their ideas and their potential and have it grow in our state. We are proud of this, and I am eager to work with everyone across the country to make this a reality for Americans, not only Michiganders. And when we do that, we will have everyone's ideas have a pathway to become real. That is what America is all about. We are a nation of people with ideals and ideas that we work together to put them into the world to make the world a better place. I see this as enabling infrastructure, clean slate, enabling infrastructure, enabling people to be able to expunge records so they can then pursue their passions and their opportunities. And so as a policymaker, any day that I'm able to accomplish that is a good day. And so I am thankful to everyone in the broad coalition. The coalition is so broad. It's broader than the coalition on almost any other issue that I've been able to work on as a public servant. That is inspiring. It shows me that this is the reason to continue to wake up, continue to work hard, because we know that this possibility is within our grasp to place it into the hands of the people who we serve. So thank you so much, Rebecca, and to the team. I am so happy to be along on this journey with all of you, and let's go do some more good work for our people.
Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for all of that. And you've gotten a little bit into the why behind why the state of Michigan took on this clean slate challenge. But as you mentioned, it brought together an incredibly broad and bipartisan, often described as strange bedfellows coalition. And it's really a story of bipartisan collaboration, given that it was a Republican-controlled legislature working with a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor to enact what, as I mentioned, is now the most expansive clean slate law anywhere in the US in a time of increasing political polarization. Can you talk a little bit about why this issue brought leaders together across party lines in a way that many others have not?
Well, I'll start with a simple idea, and it's the fact that good ideas are good. Like the truth is, when I've been working on and leading our administration's effort on many criminal legal system reforms, including one on reforming our jail and pretrial incarceration system in Michigan. And what I saw when we toured the entire state to talk about jail reform, or when I toured the state to talk about improving quality of life in cities, in every single community, this question of record expungement as a barrier to opportunity and potential came up. Every single community, rural, urban, Black, white, tribal nation, it didn't matter. This was a challenge that confronted every single community. There was not, it feels like every family has someone who has been held back by by how these laws have not worked for people in the past. And so we were able to build this broad coalition again with legislators and partners, folks from around the country wanting to come in and help in Michigan, because this impacts everyone in a positive way. We were mindful of what the implications of this would be for survivors, and we worked with the community to make sure that we were not only mindful, but that we went out of way to make provision for people to be and feel and experience safety, because that is part of justice as well, and also recognizing that these things are not mutually exclusive. And so I think that that folks coming together from different walks of life, different parts of our state, different political ideologies, I think, again, this is representative of the best of us and the best of our policymaking system. And it was all rooted in the fact that this is a good idea. And so if we start with good ideas, that is fertile ground to find bipartisan collaboration.
You mentioned that this is a significant investment for Michigan in reform of the criminal legal system, but also in removing barriers to opportunity and to jobs in particular. What advice do you have for other leaders in the states who might be considering clean slate, but who are also facing budget gaps right now, as many states are, and exacerbated in many cases by the COVID pandemic, and who might be worried about policies that come with upfront costs?
Sure. So I recognize this, and this was something that we had to really work through in the state of Michigan. And that's not something that happened quickly. That took time for us to have those conversations with stakeholders at every level of government, because this is a multi-level of government coordination is necessary for multiple branches of government. But what I would say, though, is, again, if we start from the premise of there are few pieces of legislation that I believe will be as enabling as this one to people across walks of life. So again, we're starting from a good place. The second thing I would say is to not be afraid of the technical component of automation. That actually presented an opportunity for us in Michigan to recognize that we could make something easier for someone, and that in the long term, a person who's able to fully participate in civic life, that participation will lead to them creating value for their community, value for their family, and ultimately revenue for the state. Is something that we can begin to recruit. But sometimes you need to make an investment. Sometimes you need to step up. Sometimes you need to say, this is the right thing to do, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And that's all budgets are. They're a reflection of priorities. They're a reflection of values. And we chose the value of access to civic life, of second chances, and of opportunity pathways for people here in the state of Michigan. I think we all are capable of doing that. And so by working together to be creative, to find those resources, we had to put some glue and gum and duct tape together to find those dollars, but we found them, and it is possible. And I believe that all of us are capable of doing that.
And if I understand correctly, the state expects the policy to actually bring about cost savings in the long run in a way that
Absolutely.
it makes this an investment in the short term, but also in the long term.
Absolutely, because again, I think our policies need to be biased toward participation and enabling people to fully participate in civic life, fully participate in our economy, and fully participate in the experience of housing security and food security. It is better for our state, and that's from a human perspective and from a revenue perspective.
In the last couple of minutes that I have with you, I know you've got a busy day, you're in session, and we're going to have to let you go shortly, but I would love to ask, what is the road ahead for implementation of this clean slate law? And what's next on the horizon for second chance reforms and for reform of the criminal legal system in Michigan?
Certainly. So as I mentioned earlier, we have proposed a significant investment this budget year for the implementation of the automated expungement system. So we are working that through our budget negotiation process now here in Michigan, which we hope to have wrapped up by the end of June. Then we'll be able to get that kicked off. But the stakeholders will come together. Our technical teams are sort of ready to go as soon as we are able to greenlight those funds. That's very exciting. When it comes to expungement, we certainly would like to look at ways that we may be able to extend the automated characteristic to further expungement eligible offenses. So we're going to take a look at that from a policy perspective. We expanded, for example, eligibility for expungement to certain, again, cannabis offenses, but they're not included in the automated process as of right now. That's something that I believe some lawmakers are going to want to take a look at coming forward. So we really want to get the system in place, but also sort of move the policy in parallel. So we'll be looking at that. And in terms of criminal legal system reforms more broadly, Michigan, I'm proud also we were able to play a leadership role in really some of our jail reforms that we passed in 2020 related to reforming our probation and parole systems in terms of reclassifying offenses to not make them jailable, changing some of our sentencing guidelines. And we're looking to tackle more issues in the jail reform space, even including looking at, how bail and bond work in our state, and how we are really working with people from a failure to pay perspective, or failure to appear, and using incentives and systems that actually work, because jailing people for not having money doesn't. And so we're going to be tackling those issues as well. We have another broad coalition, the bipartisan coalition that came together for jail reform in our state was tremendous. And we had a task force approach to that, a bipartisan task force that looked at that as well. So I think you're going to see more progress coming from the state of Michigan in this area, and will be very exciting.
And my final question for you this morning, and then we'll let you get back to session, is I want to acknowledge that this was a push over the course of multiple years in Michigan. And Josh Ho of Safe and Just Michigan will be joining us on a panel today to talk in greater depth about that full campaign and how it came together. But it started well before the COVID pandemic hit U.S. shores. And you mentioned that this in many ways is a jobs bill and is important to economic recovery. I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit before we let you go about why this kind of policymaking, removing barriers to opportunity for people with records in particular, is more important now than ever as policymakers at all levels of government are working together to build back better, with that as the word of the day.
So it's absolutely correct that this is a multi-year journey. This has really been a generational journey for so many people. And so certainly I want to not only acknowledge, but frankly lift up the tireless work of people who've been advocating for policies like this. And we're just proud to be able to come in and play a role in delivering them across the finish line for huge groups of people. And as we look now, so now we have an opportunity as we pave the pathway out of the pandemic, which we can do on our own terms. We'll always take the opportunity to plug everybody should get vaccinated. And after you get a vaccine dose, you talk to someone else about getting it. It's the way that we convince persuadable people to make that choice so we can end this pandemic on our own terms. But we need to talk about the fact that there are so many people who during this pandemic, there are those who struggled who need support. And there are people who have been within themselves thinking about ideas that they want to put into the world. And we need to make sure that there are no barriers that are between them and the equitable access to the opportunities and the prosperity that those ideas can enable for them, their families, their communities, our state, and our nation. And so I believe that it's our opportunity, our responsibility to make sure that those pathways are real, to make sure that people can get connected to the resources. And so a person with an idea, I want Michigan to be the best place to launch that idea coming out of this pandemic. And if there are unnecessary barriers, again, to partnership, to resources, to capital, to physical space, to relationships, we need to remove those. And this type of legislation does that. And so we need to be looking and searching for opportunities to remove those types of barriers to enable that possibility, because as we build back into a more equitable and more just future, this is a system that has disproportionately impacted people like me, Black men, young Black men, people of color from all walks of life. And so by enabling those people to be able to have their ideas have a better chance of success because there are fewer barriers between them and that possibility, that should be our North Star when it comes to building policies that deliver for people.
And it's a particularly timely day to be acknowledging that connection as we get yet another installment of the, the administration's multi-part recovery plan in the form of the American Families Plan, and lots more to come on that front. But hopefully we have policymakers in Washington listening to what you're saying and learning from the states in that regard in this important work. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for your time today, for joining us for this conversation, and for your leadership in the state of Michigan. I have to tell you, there's some folks in Pennsylvania who are a little bit jealous right now. And so that's going to come up on the panel in just a little bit, now that Michigan's the national leader when it comes to clean slate. So you've got some states coming for you, trying to be where you guys are.
I like other states being jealous of Michigan. That's a good spot for us to be in. And so I want to thank everyone, though, because we're all striving, right? We are all working to deliver the best, most equitable chance at success and opportunity for people in our states. And we have to navigate different sort of structures to do it, but all of us are going trying to get to the same destination. And that's what we're all about. That's how we're public servants in this together. So thank you everyone for the leadership you're showing across the country. I can't wait to celebrate more victories in this realm of all of you.
And we look forward to talking with you more once there are some exciting numbers from the implementation of this law of people who are getting their records cleared. So Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. And Lieutenant Governor, have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. You the same. Be safe.
It's now my honor to introduce our fabulous panel, who together represent 4 of the states who have been leading the way on clean slate and fair chance licensing reforms. Representative Jordan Harris is the minority whip of the Pennsylvania Assembly. Sharon Dietrich is litigation director at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia. Josh Ho is policy analyst at Safe and Just Michigan, organization we were just hearing about from the Lieutenant Governor and that campaign there. Whitley Carpenter is a criminal justice staff attorney at Forward Justice in North Carolina. And Jael Myrick is interim director of the Clean Slate practice at the East Bay Community Law Center in California. Just a reminder to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Second Chance Month, and you can put questions for the panel into the Q&A box. We'll be taking them at the end of the panel discussion, so go ahead and feel free to start putting those questions in the using the Q&A button that's on your screen. You can also put questions onto Twitter using hashtag Second Chance Month. And the Lieutenant Governor's remarks are really a terrific segue into some of the panel discussion we're about to get into here. So we'll bring all of those folks up on screen so that we can have them join us now for this next portion. So as I was saying, the Lieutenant Governor's remarks are a terrific segue into where clean slate automatic record clearance started, which takes us to Pennsylvania. And Sharon and Whip Harris, I'm going to go to the 2 of you first as our resident Pennsylvanians to take the conversation there next. And Sharon, I'm going to start with you. Pennsylvania is a state that has been a leader on both clean slate and fair chance licensing, with legislation enacted on both fronts, within the past 3 years. I'd love to give you the chance to talk a little bit about the origins of Clean Slate and where the idea came from and how it came to be in Pennsylvania. And I'd also love to hear you talk a little bit about how it came to be the beginning of yet more change rather than the end. The Pennsylvania legislature has already expanded Clean Slate once and has come back and done licensing reform last year, both unanimously. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about why both of these policies are so important.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's wonderful to be here today. So, I have worked for the last 30 odd years in the legal aid program in Philadelphia in its employment unit. And criminal records chose us. We did not choose them or the people that have them as our issue that we took on. Really, we were responsive to community um, uh, uh, efforts to seek help for records, and those efforts grew dramatically as the years have gone by, to the point where our general employment practice was spending 2/3 of its time handling criminal record cases. And the thing that our clients most wanted when they came to see us was not a particular job generally. It was, how do I get out of the bind that I'm in? I want my record cleared. I want it expunged because that is the thing that is across the board causing me problems getting jobs, problems getting housing, et cetera, et cetera. And so CLS took on record clearing, which in Pennsylvania is both expungement of arrests and some other things, but primarily sealing of records. We took that on as our main priority because that's what our clients were telling us they most wanted. And as we grew that practice, we tried everything possible to increase the scale of it so we could help as many people as possible. And so, for instance, we built something called an expungement generator where, we could pull data off of the court's database and build petitions so that we could flood the court. Well, guess what? The court was flooded. And that meant that even as many petitions as we could file, they couldn't really process them, nor could the DAs handle them, nor could the clerks of the various agencies handle them. And it became clear that if we were going to have a real impact that would help our clients in Philadelphia and beyond, we needed automation, because that was the only thing that was going to really scale up expungement and sealing to a point where it would make a difference, not to a small number of people, but a large number of people. We're now more than 36 million cases sealed as a result of Clean Slate in Pennsylvania. So to make a long story short, because I know there are many stories to be told in this hour, we were able to build a bipartisan support for this, both in our stakeholders and our General Assembly in Pennsylvania. We got our Clean Slate law passed. It was the first one in the nation. And the funny thing happened when we get the law passed. The people who helped get it passed didn't just forget about it and say, hey, cross that off the list. Instead, everybody got really jazzed that we'd done this thing. And so we were able to come back just last year during the pandemic, during the teeth of the pandemic, and get two very significant additional bills passed. So first, we passed Act 53, which is occupational licensing reform, more infrastructure to help people with records move their lives forward. Now they have new occupations open to them. And then in Act 83, we managed to decouple court fines and costs from record clearing. So even if you owe court fines and costs, now you can get your record cleared anyway. So that was something that expanded the scope of Clean Slate 1.0. And I really do think it was the fact that all of our stakeholders felt so good about what we achieved with Clean Slate that has allowed those additional reforms to move forward. And hopefully we'll get to Clean Slate 3.0, which I'll let the Mr. Whip talk about, because I know he is chomping at the bit to do that.
And we'll give you a chance, Sharon, to come back and talk a little bit more about licensing later in the conversation. That's another achievement for Pennsylvania in a short period of time as well. Whip Harris, that is a perfect time to bring you into this conversation. And thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. I'd love to give you the chance to talk a little bit about what kicked off this wave of second chance reforms in a state that has a Republican-controlled legislature and which frankly is not usually seen as a leader on bold policymaking. I say with no shade to Pennsylvania intended. How did clean slate and fair chance licensing come to be issues that brought together Harrisburg Republicans and Democrats who don't often agree on much else?
Well, first, let me thank you for having us here. It is always an honor to talk about clean slate and how Pennsylvania was the first in the nation. I mean, I heard the lieutenant governor, got nothing but love for the brother. I love what y'all done in Michigan, but somebody has to lead and be first, and that was Pennsylvania. So I had to get that out there because I was sitting there listening to you, and I'm like, now come on. But no, it's always a privilege to be here to talk about this. How we did it is simply because we talked about it being a jobs bill. One of the things I made sure that we put into the space is that this is about getting people gainfully employed and taking them from tax burden to taxpayer. What we saw in Pennsylvania, whether it was urban cities like Philadelphia or Harrisburg or Pittsburgh, or whether it was some of our rural counties like Pike County or Cameron County, what we saw is that men and women who were formerly incarcerated were locked out, were shut out of professions. I think, my former chief defender used to say there were over 400 rules and regulations that lock people out of employment. We had just legalized medically marijuana in Pennsylvania, but that industry is shut out to a person with a criminal record. We have legalized casinos in Pennsylvania, but that work would be shut out for people with criminal records. So, for us, it was, we tell people to come out of the system. We tell them to reform their lives and change their lives around, but then we tie one hand behind their back because we really push them out of many professions that they could make a living at and raise a family on. So for us, we came at this from an angle where it wasn't about Democrat or Republican, but it was about how do we get Pennsylvanians back to work. So I teamed up with a Republican from Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, who is, totally different than me. My friend, Representative Cheryl Delosier. Listen, I'm a Black Democrat from urban Philadelphia. She's a white woman, Republican from suburban Cumberland County. And most people would think that we don't have a lot in common. But the truth is, when it comes to this issue, we have lots in common. So it's clean slate. It's professional licensing reform. It's the formation of a criminal justice reform caucus. And it's moving forward with an agenda that doesn't see partisanship, but sees putting people back to work and getting people back to a place where they can take care of themselves and their families.
And Whip Harris, I'm going to give you a chance a little bit later in our discussion to talk about what's next. I was not surprised to hear you say that you had some feelings as the Michigan Lieutenant Governor was talking about how they've got the most expansive clean slate law now in the country. I know Pennsylvania's got some feelings about how to change that. So we'll come back to that in just a little bit. Whitley, I would love to bring you in next because North Carolina is another state that has made immense strides on both the licensing and the record clearing fronts in recent years. A major fair chance licensing reform law and the passage of the state's Second Chance Act were two incredibly important wins in North Carolina. Your organization, Forward Justice, has been an anchor of these and other second chance reforms in the state, with partners who also deserve huge shout outs, including the North Carolina Justice Center and the Second Chance Alliance. Talk a little bit about the significance of North Carolina's new fair chance licensing law and the Second Chance Act, and the story behind this wave of second chance reforms in a southern state with a Republican-controlled legislature. And in particular, how did a lobby day win over Over 1,000 North Carolinians directly impacted by criminal records took over the state capitol to call for second chances, turn into a wave of bipartisan laws, not just bills, but laws that won unanimous support in the legislature, with directly impacted leadership clearly pivotal to the success of these reform efforts.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. So I would say in North Carolina and everywhere, it's about a culture shift. I mean, we know that we have to stop treating people with records like second-class citizens. In North Carolina, more than 2 million people have a criminal record. And so the fair chance licensing law that you're talking about was passed in 2019. And here in North Carolina, a little more than a third of the jobs require an occupational license. And there's about, I think, 70 different boards that determine the eligibility to enter those jobs. And so that right to work, I believe, is what we call the bill, was kind of what opened up those opportunities. So it got rid of those blanket bans for getting an occupational license if you have a felony or misdemeanor convictions. It got rid of being able to use arrest records to deny a license from someone. And it also, similar to the ban the box language, required that those licensing boards' decisions be based on whether or not that criminal record is directly related to the job in which you would get from having that license. It also prohibited those licensing boards from using those kind of loose terms like moral turpitude and good character in determining like whether someone would be able to receive a license. And what we see with those terms is that they're very arbitrary, and you can kind of determine what's going to fit into something based on how you're feeling, you know, how the person that's making the decision feels. So there's lots of other factors and considerations that kind of were put into that licensing law. But in addition, you want to talk about the Second Chance Act, which passed the following summer in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic, which we started advocating for back in 2018. And the Second Chance Act is the biggest shift, positive shift in expungement law that we've seen in North Carolina yet. And what it does, I will say in the footsteps of Pennsylvania, it does begin to automate some of the expungements in North Carolina. And those are for dismissed charges in North Carolina. Most of the provisions of the Second Chance Act went into effect in December of 2020, and will have the automation portion go into effect in 2020 of this year. So I don't have really numbers yet to say what the impact is, because it's been a gradual implementation, but it also allows district attorneys in North Carolina to file expungement petitions, which creates opportunities for mass relief. So we've been working with folks from Code for America and other folks that are able to work with data to figure out how we can really get this mass relief that we're talking about. And North Carolina is actually going through the process of transitioning into an e-court system, which kind of pauses additional automatic relief at this point, but we're still trying to work through the details of getting those dismissed charges eligible for automation and the mass relief through the district attorney initiated expunction. Another huge thing in North Carolina, with North Carolina being one of the last states to treat 16 and 17-year-olds like adults in the criminal court system, it made special provisions for what's called raise the age expunction. So just up until 2019, if you were 16 or 17, you were treated like an adult in North Carolina in the criminal court system, no matter what you were charged with. And so what we wanted to do with the Second Chance Act is make it so that those folks who were 16 or 17 before raise the age went into effect would have access to expungements because they didn't get to benefit from the raise the age law that did pass. And so there's also some provisions for people who had convictions when they were 16 or 17 there. I could talk forever about the Second Chance Act, about fair chance licensing in North Carolina, but I know you wanted to kind of talk about the story behind it. So before 2010, there really was no opportunity for criminal record relief or expunction relief in North Carolina. And from about 2010 till 2018, there was some gradual improvements or expansion in eligibility. And, you know, prior to some of my more policy advocacy work, what I did was work on clean slate clinics across the state of North Carolina. And the need was enormous. I mean, I've filed expungements in, I want to say 65 counties. We have 100 in the state of North Carolina. And every clinic that we had, we may start at 10 a.m. There would be a line wrapped around the neighborhood at 5 or 6 a.m. of people just waiting to see if it was possible to have some relief from their criminal record. And so the need was absolutely there. And that also shows the need for automation and why it should be expanded. But this is kind of how we began to grow this North Carolina Second Chance Alliance, which is a group that many of the partners that you mentioned, Rebecca, are a part of. We're a coalition that comes together and advocates for second chance policies in the state of North Carolina. And what we found in our advocacy is that the North Carolina Conference of District Attorneys, they're kind of treated as gatekeepers in all of these criminal justice reforms that we are working on, and kind of given veto power, if anything, on some of these expunction reforms that we've been working on. So this growth of the Second Chance Alliance and, the consistent presence of those impacted people and advocates and lobbyists and everyone coming together is really how we got to where we are right now. We relied on past expunction bill sponsors in the Senate to kind of talk about how we can introduce new legislation. And we really excluded the district attorneys from the table early on so that we could build support and momentum before we started the negotiations with them. We had to understand technology. We had to understand how the North Carolina court system operated technically before we could begin talking about automating anything. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the bipartisan coalition that we brought together for the Second Chance Act. We met weekly, every day, or I would say every week for about 18 months, just to kind of strategize and organize. And in those meetings, we began this organizing plan so that we could mobilize impacted people from across the state of North Carolina, which led to our 2018, I'm sorry, the pandemic gets me mixed up on what year it is, our 2018 Second Chance Lobby Day. And with that Lobby Day, we had over 1,000 directly impacted people on the lawn of our General Assembly, able to tell their stories and why second chance legislation is important. And that of this long story that I've told is the most important part of it. A wise friend once told me those that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. I can't tell the same story that, my neighbor can tell. And so being able to hear directly from someone who is impacted by the expungement law being as limited as it is, or who may not have the resources to hire an attorney to get that expunction filed for them, is far more powerful than just, sitting down with someone and chatting about how this might possibly affect someone. And so really being able to get people well-versed in what this law is and how it may impact them so that they can apply their story to that and talk to lawmakers. Because what we find is many lawmakers aren't aware of how criminal records may impact someone's life and don't know anyone with a criminal record. So I will slow down, let someone else talk, but the Second Chance Act ultimately passed in the House in 2020, as I said, in the middle of the pandemic. And we're still working on implementation, and I hope to be able to share some numbers as all of the provisions of the Second Chance Act are implemented.
And there's lots more to talk about in terms of where you guys are headed next, because all of that was the beginning, definitely not the end of what you're doing. I have to say it was one of the more powerful moments in my career doing this work, getting to take part in that lobby day that you mentioned, and getting to see a wave of folks who are those most impacted by the broken criminal legal system and the stigma of a criminal record just descend onto the Capitol to say, nope, we're going to bring about change, and to see that kind of momentous change so quickly after such incredible work and such mobilization of directly impacted folks it's amazing to behold. So just congratulations to North Carolina and to Forward Justice and your coalition. Jael, I'm going to bring you in next and turn back to licensing for just another moment. California is another state that has seen tremendous movement on both licensing and record clearing in recent years. A broad fair chance licensing law called AB 2138 was passed, as well as an automatic expungement law that, while it doesn't clear existing records, does automate the process moving forward. Talk a little bit about California's new licensing reform law, which was passed in late 2018. What does the law do? Who's being helped, and how is it working so far? And I would love to give you an opportunity as well to speak about why this reform was needed and what the impetus was behind it in terms of getting to licensing reform as a priority in California.
Thank you. And I'll start there. I'll start with why it was needed. And I think it's similar themes to what, my colleagues from North Carolina and Pennsylvania, Michigan, and all the other states talked about. What occupational licenses, it seems like a technical word, but in the state of California, really, when we talk about occupational licensing, we're talking about the certifications for people to become the types of jobs that are professions, basically, right? So it's the difference between whether, people might be able to get a job and survive, or whether they're able to actually follow their skills and really achieve their highest self. So in many ways, it's a barrier to the middle class, right? It's the difference between working at McDonald's and, making minimum wage and actually being a real estate appraiser or a mechanic or a barber or, whatever it is that that you're good at, that's your profession. And what we're seeing is people would do everything that they're supposed to do. Obviously they have something on their record, but they would do what they need to do to become whatever that profession is. So let's say a real estate appraiser. It's not easy to become a real estate appraiser, right? You still have to go to school, you still have to get certified, and you have to take tests. So people would do all of that and then find out late in the process that because they had this thing on their criminal record that they were going to get denied by the licensing agency, or they were going to have to go through all these extra hoops, or they were going to have to file an appeal, and they were going to have to do all of this. And so it was really a huge barrier. In California, 1 in 3 Californians who are adults have criminal records. So this is a barrier impacting a lot of people. And licensing impacted, like I said, so many of the types of jobs that allow people to move into the middle class. So with AB 2138, what we were able to do is get legislation passed that said, let's just add some common sense in here. And so one of the things we did was to say that, look, if something is old, if it's older than 7 years, and it's not a serious felony, and in the state of California, serious felony is a very specific phrase. It accounts for about a dozen crimes, including things like rape and that sort of thing. So, but if it's not a serious felony and it's over 7 years old, then the licensing agency shouldn't see it. And so that was the first thing that we did. We also said, the expungement, and I'll talk a little bit about automatic expungements in California. Expungement is a phrase in California that it's kind of unclear what it means everywhere. In California, expungement actually just takes a conviction and makes it a dismissal. And so what that means is, for private employment, it's great. For private employment, it means they don't see it at all. But for licensing agencies and for any sort of government job, they still see the arrest and the conviction. They just see that it's been dismissed at the end. And so people are still seeing that even in occupational licensing. So what we said is, okay, if someone gets an expungement of 1203.4, now the occupational licensing agency won't see that as well. And so we were able to do that. And so that law just went into effect here in California in July of 2020. So similar to the story in North Carolina, we're still sort of waiting to see how it's impacting people. But I could tell you, as someone who does clean slate work and talks to people on a regular basis, the conversation's easier. Now, when someone calls and says, I'm in the process, I'm in school to become a registered nurse, I could just tell them, well, how old is your conviction? It's 10 years old. You're 10 years old, and it's for something simple like shoplifting. Don't worry about it. It's not going to come up, right? So now that part of the conversation is so much easier for so many people. Like I said, we don't have the numbers yet. I don't know how many people. I know that it's going to be in the thousands, though, because that's how many people are impacted. Like we said, 1 out of 3 Californians or have a criminal record. And automation, as you mentioned, is something that's being talked about here in California. The bill that passed and that is currently law that actually went into effect this year says that going forward, if someone who basically goes through the type of process where they get probation, when that probation is over, their case will immediately be dismissed under 1203.4, which is, again, what I was talking about before, which is kind of California's version of expungement. It is important to understand that there are limitations to that. It doesn't seal the record. It doesn't, and so that's something that needs to be considered. And a lot of times you got to make sure you have the right paperwork. Also, California had a provision that said that the automatic, it won't go into effect until the state specifically puts a budget appropriation for it. And I'm not sure that decision has happened yet. So there's other steps that California needs to take, as certainly when it comes to automatic. But we are trying to move in the right direction. And I also say on the licensing front, there's a couple other areas of licenses. We were able to, the bill we passed, 2138, dealt with the Department of Consumer Affairs, which dealt with the vast majority of licenses in the state of California. However, there was still some work that needed to be done on EMT, which is how most people become firefighters. Last year, a bill passed on that, and we're looking at the implementation of that to see how that works out. So hopefully a lot of the firefighters who were fighting the California brush fires, who were actually incarcerated when they were doing it. Hopefully those folks can actually get jobs based on that bill, but we're waiting to see how that's implemented. And then the other one that we're still trying to fight for right now is around the Department of Social Services. A lot of the caregiving jobs, and from our organization, what we've seen is this majority women of color, and they're forced to go through these very long process where it's about 100 days for them to get certified. And during that time, they'll get hired for the job, and during that time, they'll lose the job because it just takes so long for the process. And so we saw that in a 5-month period, something like 6,300 people lost their jobs, not because they were denied based on what was on their record, but just because the process took so long. So we have a bill this year to hopefully fix that one as well.
And I'm going to stay with you for just one follow-up, because I know you're not going to be able to join us for audience Q&A. And so I'll take moderator's privilege and give you one more question. And that is just if you've got any lessons learned throughout the process of fighting for these incredibly important reforms that you would want to offer to policymakers and advocates who are considering either expungement, expansion, and automation, or fair chance licensing in their states.
Good question. I guess if I was to say lessons learned is just, keep pushing. Some of these bills don't get passed on the first try with us, but if you keep looking at it and keep working towards it, you can get an answer, and you can try to get something done and make progress. So I think keeping going forward, even when people are not in support, and being careful and trying to understand all the nuances do matter a lot in this situation. So like I mentioned, in the state of California, we've got to make sure that, automatic expungement is great, but we got to make sure that the folks actually get the actual documentation. We've got to make sure that it actually shows up on the person's record. We got to make sure that we're considering, what the impact's going to be of the 1203.4 as well as clearance. So getting into the details matters in all of these situations as well to make sure that people are impacted in a positive way.
And we appreciate you joining us so much today. I know you have to go staff a hotline, which is very important to do. So we appreciate your time, and congratulations on everything that the East Bay Community Law Center has been part of fighting for and that you've been talking about. Josh, I'm gonna circle around to you now and bring us back to Michigan, where we started with this conversation with your state's lieutenant governor. We heard from Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist about Michigan's new clean slate law, and we heard some of Whip Harris's feelings about that law being slightly more expansive than what Pennsylvania has done. Your organization, Safe and Just Michigan, was one of the groups that spearheaded the push for clean slate in Michigan, along with a broad bipartisan coalition that, like many of the other states' efforts that we've heard about today, agrees on very little else aside from that particular bill. You come to this work not only as a policy expert and an advocate, but also as someone who is directly impacted by a record, and directly impacted leadership, as with many of these campaigns, was core to the Michigan Clean Slate campaign. Talk a little bit about the story behind how Michigan came to be the state with the most expansive clean slate law in the U.S., and who you expect to be helped by the law, as well as what's next for clean slate and second chance policies in Michigan.
Thanks for the great question, Rebecca. And it's a real honor to be on this panel with so many friends and luminaries. I'm very hopeful that Rep. Harris, eventually that Pennsylvania gets to catch up to Michigan. I definitely give them kudos for being first, and, we're the first that did felonies. So, it works out. It's such an honor to also follow our great Lieutenant Governor. One quick aside about Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. I was lucky enough to attend an event with him at the Parnell facility here in Michigan before the COVID pandemic. And one part of his speech, it was in front of a bunch of incarcerated people. And I still remember him saying these exact words: "I was elected to represent all the people of Michigan, and that includes incarcerated people too." And I've been a big fan of his ever since as a formerly incarcerated person. And it was, it's really great to be, to have him on this on this discussion to talk about this. Anyway,
you said podcast because you're usually used to being on my podcast, Josh. Nice Freudian slip there.
That's true. I also have an interview later today on mine. So, whatever, these things happen. Anyway, to answer your question, in many ways, we were just kind of in the right place at the right time with the right legislature. There was bipartisan support, strong champions, business and grassroots support across the state, as well as folks from outside the state. But a few things I should probably highlight. First, we were very lucky to have a University of Michigan law professors, Sonia Starr and JJ Prescott, have access to data that would not have been available in other states. Michigan's petition process already allowed for the expungement of felonies at a very limited amount. And so they were able to take that de-identified data and prove that even in the case of felonies, the public safety benefits were obvious and the employment benefits were obvious. And so we had a very unique data set that we were able to use that was particular to our state to push the movement forward. Second, we really had a great network of incredible directly impacted folks who showed up to testify at hearings, to show up at events, to show up all over the state, including on the steps of the Capitol, and also just a group of really committed criminal justice reform groups across the state that all come together usually under the banner of the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. And so, it was a really statewide collaborative effort with a lot of people involved and a lot of moving pieces, but it really just took a lot of things falling together at the same time and really having the support of both sides of a fairly divided legislature, which I think you all talked about earlier. Next, you asked who would be helped. And the great news, as the Lieutenant Governor said earlier, is that people have estimated that as many as 1 million people in Michigan will be able to clear their criminal records and finally uncheck those boxes and kind of be able to move on with their lives. As a formerly incarcerated person, I'm very proud to have been a small part of that law. It'll make a huge difference to so many lives. There are people this law will not help, and I am one of those people, but we will also not be hurt by this law, and a whole lot of people will be helped. So we're very excited about it. And in a way, what I think, and I think maybe Rep. Harris talked about this too, it's a way to prove concept. And once we've implemented the first stage of the clean slate law, and we can show the public safety benefits, it becomes easier and easier, I think, to expand the clean slate laws that exist now. Finally, you asked what's next. There was an occupational licensing package, and really we passed last session over 40 substantial criminal justice reform bills. I think the Lieutenant Governor talked about the 20 bills that passed as part of the jail task force that included driver's license suspensions being, stop doing that, which is one of the largest drivers of incarceration in Michigan. And there was a very large occupational licensing package as part of that. And so we also had juvenile expungement and a lot of other things. But we're working hard to ensure that all of these things that we're working on continue to move forward. There's actually a DUI expungement bill in the legislature right now for people with first-time DUI offenses where they only have one offense. And so I think we're doing a lot of work to try, and we've got the rest of the jails task force bill to move forward. And so I think, we're really lucky to be in a position where, while there is a lot of debate and a lot of divisiveness across our state on a lot of issues, this is not one of the issues. And we have really great leadership in both the House and the Senate who are willing to work very hard to try to pass criminal justice legislation. And the last thing I'll say is just that I know we at Safe and Just Michigan are really committed to moving this fight forward and to use this first clean slate package as a way to continue to try to expand expungement in the future. So this is just the start, and hopefully of a very long journey until every single person with a criminal record, as the research shows, after 8 to 10 years, will be able to get their records cleared and move on with their life.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations again on what Michigan has been able to do so far. I think that takes me back around to Pennsylvania, where we started this panel discussion. And Sharon and Whip Harris, I'm going to come back around to you. Sharon, I'd first like to give you a quick opportunity to, heads up, audience questions coming. So be putting your questions into the Q&A box. That's my brief interlude there to interrupt myself. Sharon, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about one of the most important lessons, or actually two of the most important lessons that you have really been preaching, and I think preaching is the right word here, from your experience with the Clean Slate law in Pennsylvania, and they have to do with fines and fees and also implementation, which are themselves very connected. Would love to give you a chance to talk just a little bit about the intersection between fines and fees and record clearing, and how Pennsylvania came to address fines and fees as a potential barrier to Clean Slate as part of efforts to ensure full implementation of the law. And Whip Harris, I'm going to come to you next to ask a question I think you know is coming.
We sort of knew that the requirement in our original Clean Slate law that you had to have paid your financial obligations was going to be a problem. But I think we didn't know quite the extent to which it was going to be a problem until we got data after the law was passed. And it immediately became clear that that barrier was going to really undermine the effectiveness of the law. And so we immediately set about trying to rectify that with new legislation, which eventually became Act 83. Thank you again, Mr. Whip, for your work on that. So that fines and costs no longer are a barrier to the sealing of a record. I'm not sure, quite honestly, that if that had been in the original Clean Slate package, how our General Assembly would have felt about that. But once they got behind the concept of Clean Slate, they wanted it to work. And so as we identified barriers that were keeping Clean Slate from working at its fullest, we were able to attack them by things like getting Act 83 passed. We're getting data inserted into databases to apply it more broadly. We're getting FBI records sealable in Pennsylvania, which is an issue in Pennsylvania. So my answer overall is implementation for both of these laws is really, really key. You can't just stop and feel like you've done your job and you can move on to the next one when the law passed. Occupational licensing reform, we're in the middle right now of implementation. And I'm convinced that if we were not in the middle of implementation, if we had just let it run its course, the effect of that law would have been much diminished, because the state agencies aren't necessarily of the same mind as the General Assembly was. And we need to do work all over again to make sure that that law is going to be implemented as broadly as it was intended by the General Assembly. And that's taking quite a bit of work and education of the state licensing boards. So my takeaway is aggressive implementation of both of these types of laws is really, really crucial.
And Whip Harris, I'm going to bring you in next to talk a little bit about the friendly wager that I understand may be in place between you and Michigan policymakers when it comes to who's going to be first to start automatically clearing felonies. Did I get my intelligence right?
Well, listen, we want to get felonies done here in Pennsylvania. We took an approach of, and I think this approach worked, and it didn't just work for Pennsylvania. I think it worked for across the country. You have to sometimes take a bite out of the apple and then come back for other bites. We passed Clean Slate in 2018, but we passed in 2016 what was called an Order of Limited Access, which was basically the forerunner to Clean Slate, which with regards to record sealing in general. And when we saw that the sky didn't fall and that everything didn't go to hell in a handbasket, it gave my colleagues the necessary support to move forward and get Clean Slate done in 2018, and then after that, removing fines and fees. I think we just did that last year. So I think that approach is what was necessary for Pennsylvania to even start the process. But we are going to move forward. I mean, Sharon and I talked about this when we first got Clean Slate. Sharon has had language ready for felonies, I think, since day one. Like we was ready to go on day one to get felonies done. And to be honest with you, there was some of my colleagues who weren't ready to do it. But now when we see the positive impact that Clean Slate has, we're trying to find the sweet spot on what we can get done. I will say this to my friend Josh. I heard you say that it looks like Michigan's law will affect 1 million people. That is great, because Pennsylvania has already affected 1.1 million people and has already sealed over 36 million. Yes, that's right. 36 million records. So, we applaud our friends in Michigan, but you got a lot of records to seal to catch up. So, we laugh and joke about it. Look, this is the best thing to have a competition on when if you really want to be honest about how we can literally use government to impact and change people's lives. But I want to say this: the fact that we've already sealed 36 million records without touching felonies, shows you how big of a problem criminal records are and how much they can affect a person's life. I remember, and Sharon, you might remember this, at a CLS breakfast. You guys gave me an award some years ago, and you told a story about a young woman who was working but could not advance her career because of her criminal record. This young woman had children to take care of and was stagnant, not because of her talent, but because of something she did 10 or 15 years ago. So for me, when we talk about this work, when we talk about moving it forward, we talk about the things that we want to get done, like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about helping to put back or put the pieces back together for families. We're talking about helping people not only get jobs, but about the folks who have jobs who are underemployed and can't move forward because of their criminal records. Like, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about things that can actually affect the lives of a person. So that's why, this work around criminal record sealing and around professional licensing is important. Imagine this: you go to school, you do everything that you're supposed to do, and you pass the tests, you pass your state exams, and somebody tells you, we can't give you a license because of something you did 10 or 15 years ago. You passed all of your tests, so you have the knowledge base. You passed the state boards, so you're qualified. But something you did 15 years ago when you were a different person, you can't work in that field, so you have to take a lower paying job to support your family. I tell people all the time, we should not judge people by the worst days of their lives. And that's exactly what criminal records do. And that's why this work that is sweeping across the nation is extremely important.
We're going to move now into some audience Q&A. One of the questions, I think this is a terrific question. Some of you have started to get into this a little bit in telling your stories, but I think it really is one of the sort of $1 million questions for folks who have run successful campaigns, because everyone who's sharing virtual space with us today on this panel is talking about bills that became law and so are actually now in effect. And that question asks, I'm wondering if the panelists could talk about what opposition they faced to their clean slate laws. I'll extend it also to the fair chance licensing laws we're talking about. What groups opposed those bills, and what did the coalitions do to overcome that opposition? And Whitley, I'm going to bring you in on this one first, since you started to get into this a little bit by talking about power building in response to the district attorneys as a gatekeeper.
Absolutely. So I would say the Conference of District Attorneys and the Sheriff's Association in North Carolina haven't flat out opposed the laws, but definitely play a role in making the laws a bit weaker after being able to engage with the legislators that we're working with on these laws. And I think that just kind of goes back to how you started this, Rebecca. The best practices or lessons or tips that I would say is you have to organize directly impacted leadership and voices, because again, a mentor of mine says you don't win because you're right. We're right about a lot. We win because we're strong. So if we can organize these impacted people, it shows that we have power, and it shows that these people that are opposing this, they are elected officials. And so if these constituents care about this issue, then we have more power to push that forward. Again, we haven't been able to do as much in-person organizing because of the pandemic, but just yesterday, we took a few directly impacted people to the legislature to talk about additional well, not clean slate legislation, expanding expungement eligibility in North Carolina. And, the first thing that we hear is, well, the Conference of DAs didn't really like that. And who do we have sitting in front of you? Someone that's saying, because of something on my record, I can't get past the background check experience. Another young man with me yesterday said he went 10 years without being able to find decent employment because of that. And so when we have, these individual stories, that's helpful, but larger groups and organizing and being able to combat that narrative. Again, the DAs and the sheriffs, they don't have real veto power. They're not voting on these bills. So we have to show, we have to have a presence, and we have to have people to be able to speak on these issues and understand what's happening in that General Assembly, because we're coming from a different perspective, and we're talking about people. We're not talking about commodities, and these are folks' lives. And when we can put that into a perspective that the lawmakers can understand and can relate to and see, you're a person just like I am, and you have a kid that goes to the same school that I do, and you can relate to that person, then you're more likely to see them as a human and not as a record, which is what we're seeing happening so many times. So my take would be to organize, and make sure that directly impacted people are at the front of that.
It's a great answer to that question. And for time, I'm going to keep moving through, although I know all of our panelists probably have thoughts to offer to each of these. We've got a great question coming from the audience that asks for state and local advocates who are looking to do this work. Are there things that you wish the federal government would do that could help accelerate your efforts? And what a timely question that is, as we have this infrastructure package coming together and lots of discussion as part of that around jobs, and obviously a real imperative, as we heard from the Lieutenant Governor and from multiple members of this panel, to ensure that we're removing barriers to employment, so we're not leaving folks with records behind. Sharon, I'm going to put you on the spot to answer that question first. What could the federal government be doing to accelerate state efforts in this space?
Well, I feel I need to start by saying the Fed should take care of their own business and pass the Federal Clean Slate Act, because of the fact that you can't currently even get a federal arrest off your record. Nothing. And it's shameful. The federal government is so far behind the states on these issues. But one of the things that the federal government could do that would be very helpful is to provide some money to help with the technical implementation. So in Pennsylvania, our fiscal note was actually quite low. And ultimately, it's taken maybe $1 million or $2 million for the agencies who implemented to do the work. And a lot of that was their own staff. But I think we heard, was it Josh or the Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, who said $22 million in Michigan, which is a substantially higher price tag, and one that some states might balk at currently. So if the federal government could make some funds available for the technology changes that need to be made, I think that would be an immense help.
And arguably hand in hand with infrastructure, given that we're talking about the infrastructure of state IT environments and how criminal records technology is built and can be improved. So wink, wink, nudge, nudge feels like infrastructure to me, doesn't it, Sharon?
Sure does.
I'm going to move to another question from the audience, which is another terrific question. And that is, this comes from a legal aid attorney in Colorado, where our law just changed for the better. She writes, in 2019, unfortunately, that didn't include automation. And so the legal process is arduous. She's looking to get more dedicated legal staff for these cases, and also looking to get more resources to do the advocacy work to change the law there and bring automation to bear. So for folks who have gotten this type of work funded, she asks, do you have any tips about the type of funders to focus on and how to sell this type of work to funders? Sharon, I don't know if you want to take that one or if someone else does.
Well, I think that funders are coming around more so than they used to in past years. I imagine a lot of people on this call know the usual suspects that might be able to help out, whether it's Arnold Ventures, or the Clean Slate Initiative, or the Justice Action Network. There certainly are funders that can help with the bigger systemic work. Also, we're seeing now on the local level that funders are more willing to support direct service work, expungement related work. For instance, the city of Philadelphia has always been a good partner of ours because they realize that the residents of the city need to clear their records to boost their way out of poverty, to boost their wages. So those are some of the ideas that come across the top of my head.
And I think we've got time for one more question. We started a little bit late, so I'm going to take moderator's privilege to keep us just a couple of minutes over. I'm going to ask, this is a great question here, question from the audience. In the more conservative states like North Carolina and Pennsylvania, although I would argue Michigan arguably should be on that list given the legislature, what was the pushback from conservative lawmakers, if any, and how did you overcome their concerns? Whitley, do you want to take that one first, and then I can come back to Sharon and Whip Harris?
Yes, so I would say our bipartisan coalition is really how we got past this. So again, we're with the Second Chance Alliance. That's completely separate from our bipartisan Clean Slate advocacy coalition. And so how that works is we think about strategically who talks to which lawmakers and how we socialize these issues to the people who are making the decisions. And we're meeting weekly and determining, this is who's who in the General Assembly, and this is who I know, and this is who I'm regularly speaking with, and this is who this group is connected with, so that we can, socialize these issues in a way that's the most well received. And, if there are lawmakers that one of the groups in our coalition are more familiar with and understand kind of what makes them tick and what makes them kind of more receptive and open, then we're going to lean into that in the ways that are going to be most receptive. I'm trying to hurry in case anyone else wants to add in. But I think the answer to that is really just the strength of having a bipartisan coalition, everyone having different connections and relationships, and being able to strategically think together about how we overcome some of these obstacles.
And then Whip Harris, I'll bring you in on that as well. You were speaking a little bit about your esteemed colleague who is the other half of your bipartisan dynamic duo, Cheryl Delosier, a Republican representative from Cumberland County. And you described that the two of you couldn't be more different in some regards, and yet were the champions of the Clean Slate effort in Pennsylvania, which has now become multiple bites at the apple, and including licensing and a task force and on and on. What is your advice to someone asking this question? This is one of the most frequent questions I think I get as an advocate. How do you bring conservative lawmakers on board, and how do you overcome any concerns that they might have initially with this kind of lawmaking?
Yeah, well, several things, and it's a great question. One, I think you got to find the right legislator. Okay, Cheryl is a great partner. And someone that I consider a friend. Now we've literally traveled the country talking about Clean Slate and have built a friendship because of this work. But Cheryl's work a lot was around victims' rights. So she was a great spokesperson in her caucus to talk about criminal justice reform because folks already knew her as someone who would be talking about the rights of victims. So she was able to talk about the rights of victims, but also talk about the need to reform how we did records in Pennsylvania to give people a second chance. So I think that's the first thing, finding the right person to talk about the issue on the conservative side. The second thing is the business community. Our business community was very helpful. Shout out to Gene Barr and the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, Business and Industry. Gene is their president, and Gene was at many of the press conferences with us talking about Clean Slate and talking about other criminal justice reform things because, the business community was saying that we need workers. Now, we were able to provide some protections in our legislation for businesses, which was something that they were seeking. So we were able to work that as well. So also look at the business community, because I'm sure many of your business owners, your chambers will be supported. And the last thing I'll say is this. One of my colleagues or conservative member said to me, I believe in this because I'm a Christian and Jesus believes in second chances. So I said to them, hallelujah, brother. Thank you, Jesus. And we need your vote. So for me, it's about, finding the leverage points, finding the commonalities that you'll find with legislators, and using that as a way to bring them to the table to have the conversation. So if it's about the economy for you, great. If it's about the workforce, great. If it's about Jesus believing in second chances, great. I don't care how you get there. I just need you to get there. And I think that's how you can work to find those leverage points to bring more people to the table.
I can't think of a better note to end on. And I want to acknowledge we've got more questions than we got to in the audience Q&A list. And so we'll see if we can get answers to folks in follow-up. But we appreciate everyone for joining us today. To those questioners who are asking for more information about Clean Slate and ways to get campaigns funded, we've got a few of those questions. I'm going to give a shout out, and I would be remiss if I didn't, to the amazing Clean Slate initiative, which is now being headed by Sheena Mead and an amazing team who is supporting about a dozen campaigns in the states right now, looking to get into that friendly competition with Pennsylvania and Michigan and Utah and the other states that are already working to figure out what's next after they've enacted Clean Slate. So cleanslateinitiative.org is where you can go to learn more and get in touch with the folks who are running that initiative and providing support to state campaigns. And for folks who are looking to learn more about fair chance licensing, I would urge you to visit the website that is maintained by the National Employment Law Project. They have a toolkit and lots of resources there for folks who are looking to get fair chance licensing campaigns underway and looking to see what other states have done. But that's going to do it for us today. As we've run out of time, and I know folks have way more that they would love to share on these topics. So we're going to have to leave it there, and then we'll commit to having another conversation, hopefully in another year when there's more exciting news to share from these and other states as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. And for folks who have been following along on Twitter, that's another way to get your questions answered from these speakers using hashtag Second Chance Month. All the speakers will be keeping an eye on that and possibly able to answer questions there as well once we lose the chat function in the Zoom. So thank you again. And just want to say, sending everyone good energy and good wishes during these challenging times, and sending out a special wish for Second Chance Month. Thanks everyone for joining us today.